You're listening to a podcast by the Perennial Leader Project. Welcome back to another episode of In Search of Wisdom. After a short break, I'm glad to be back. In this episode, my guest is Ben Aldridge, author of the new book, Seriously Happy. Ben has spoken to audiences worldwide, encouraging others to build resilience by stepping outside their comfort zones in various ways. His writing and methods are inspired by ancient philosophy and modern psychology. You can learn more about Ben and his work at benaldridge.com. In this episode, you can expect to learn what Socrates can teach us about critical thinking, how Buddhism can help us become more resilient, the power of writing a setback diary, why the concept of impermanence can help create mental toughness, and so much more. I really enjoyed this conversation and book, and hope you do as well. Without any further delay, I bring you the wise and gracious Ben Aldridge. All right, Ben, welcome to In Search of Wisdom.
Hello. Thank you so much for inviting me to come and chat with you.
I appreciate you taking the time. Today we're discussing your book, Seriously Happy. And I have to say, this book is really perfectly suited for the podcast. You explore, or at least in my words, search for lessons from many different philosophies, such as Stoicism, Taoism, and the list goes on. So to get us started, why did you think that exploring many different philosophies was a good and useful way to approach the topic?
So for me, philosophy kind of saved my life in a way. When I got into it, it changed everything and helped me. And initially it was Stoicism that caught my attention and helped me to deal with terrible anxiety in my life. But then that led to other philosophies as well. So I ended up exploring all these different ideas. And really the purpose of this book is to highlight the wonderful selection of philosophy that there is out there. Obviously, it's such a huge list of things that we could explore, so I've had to be a little bit selective. And I've really focused on the philosophies that have resonated with me. And the idea is to spark curiosity in other people and to help them connect to these ideas, because I believe that the ideas we find in philosophy can really help us to live a better life. So it's a lot of fun to explore different angles and different takes, and that's what I've tried to present here with the new book.
Well, I love it. I think you nailed it. I think the listeners are going to love it as well. And you mentioned there the anxiety, and I just had a question in the way of intense anxiety as you write and talk about. We don't always think of turning to philosophy or philosophy as an antidote to anxiety, or at least maybe a life raft. Why don't we, and why should we?
Well, I think everyone's going to deal with whatever's thrown at them in different ways. And for me, what happened is I started having these panic attacks in my mid-20s. And to try and understand what was happening, I just started reading. And that was really the thing that changed everything. I started reading extensively on psychology, self-help, mental health, and philosophy, anything that I thought might help. And out of all of these topics, philosophy was the one that really spoke to me and actually really helped me with its practical ideas. So it depends on who we are. Certain things will resonate with different people, but philosophy hit the right note with me and really transformed my life. So that's where I came from. That's my angle. And I think it's a subject that maybe doesn't have the same kind of mainstream publicity or acknowledgement or recognition that I think it deserves, because it is so powerful. And I think a lot of people will turn to psychology as well these days. Therapy and talking therapy seem to be one of the most effective ways to help people with their mental health. And I feel that philosophy can also help. It's helped me. I've seen it. And actually, psychology and philosophy are very, very close. Some modern therapies are inspired by ancient philosophy. Cognitive behavior therapy, REBT, rational emotive behavior therapy, both influenced by Stoic philosophy. So there is this line, there's a kind of blurriness between psychology and philosophy. There's a lot going on. So maybe it's not the traditional go-to use of the subject, but I like to champion philosophy because I think there's so much that we can gain from this subject.
Beautiful. We generally get started with trying to identify terms and things like that. And I thought it could be helpful to just talk about happiness. What do you mean by, happiness, which is in the title of the book, obviously?
Yeah, so there's so many different ways that we can define happiness, and that's really interesting. So this book, the purpose of it is to really look at how happiness is slightly different to the ancient Greeks, and ancient philosophers had a different approach to happiness. So nowadays, not everyone, obviously, but some people and society in general tends to think of happiness as a conditional thing. For instance, I will be happy when I get a bigger house, if I get a promotion, if I get X amount of followers on social media. There's this tendency that's somewhat materialistic to have a condition. I will be happy when the condition is met. So we're always chasing this kind of elusive happiness, this kind of dopamine hits of achieving things. Whereas back in the day, happiness was often seen in a slightly different light. And there's a beautiful term called eudaimonia. And this is really what the whole book, Seriously Happy, is about. This concept of trying to find inner strength through developing character. And then we can handle whatever happens to us in life. And this is really the purpose of eudaimonia. Life is going to be challenging. And by building good character, we will be able to thrive irrespective of what happens to us. So it doesn't matter if things go wrong, we can still find happiness inside. And we're looking for a way to cultivate character. Really, that's what this comes down to. A good living doesn't have to be conditional, and it's not external, it's internal. And I like that because it gives us power rather than external events.
In the way of philosophy, you mentioned character. As I read this book and, other books and explore some of these different topics, it seems like we could think about it as just learning how to live, maybe like a critical, bits of education. And we're going to get into the curriculum here and talk about some of these lessons. But it's always strange to me, and I'm just curious if there's any thoughts that come up, that why we don't automatically have this as part of the curriculum. You talk about dealing with anxiety in your mid-20s, and luckily, I would say, kind of turning to philosophy and finding, some gems to navigate life. But why isn't it part of the curriculum, you think, as you go through? Because we obviously everywhere really invest a lot and learn a lot as young people and learn many different things from math, science, etc. Any thoughts?
So I definitely think that there's space for the education system to change in a positive way. I think that there needs to be a focus on things like philosophy and understanding finances. Understanding the financial system would be helpful. And I think there's lots of ways that we can improve this. So rather than worrying about tearing down the old, I think it's important to focus on the new. So we need to see collectively how we can make this work. What can we do to improve the education system? And I think that can come from the parents and teachers trying to bring in new ideas. Well, they're not new ideas, are they? They're old ideas that can actually help us. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, but I do believe that there are a lot of people out there who are trying to do this and trying to bring subjects to younger minds to help them thrive.
Yeah, well, beautiful. Well, I just want to say thanks for writing this book as well. I think it's a beautiful introduction, on-ramp to so many different important practical ideas. And you wrote the book from a very clear, practical approach. There's lots of, obviously, exercises and challenges. So I just want to say well done, and I appreciate you writing it. But let's transition into some of the lessons that you talk about in the book. And one is on critical thinking. So what can we learn about critical thinking from Socrates?
So many things. Socrates was the original philosopher in a way. He was one of the earliest guys who set up so much and established so much. And really the key thing to connect to, I believe, with Socrates is to question absolutely everything. And that's what he was doing. He was going around interrogating people by getting them to state their beliefs about certain things, and then he would cross-reference them. And there's a fascinating approach that he would just basically grill people on their opinions. And this was done to help them clarify their thinking. And this is a really important thing for all of us to do. I think we should continue to question everything around us. And that is really the root of all philosophy, to question what we are encountering, from the kind of material existence around us to metaphysical ideas to political systems. And I think it's always important to be asking questions. And this is really the foundation of science as well. We ask a question, we get an answer, then we have to ask more questions, and we continually update our opinion as new information comes in. So this was really his contribution to Western thought, and it's a very practical thing to do. And obviously it can be a little bit annoying for people who don't want questions to be asked. So naturally Socrates wasn't loved by everyone because of his persistent questioning, but that shouldn't deter us.
How do you think about getting over maybe our own pride? I think about, like, maybe what are the obstacles of putting this into practice in our own, just asking ourselves questions is how I'm thinking about it. Of, how might I be wrong? What might I be missing in the way of things? How do you think about, dashing in some humility with ourselves to be able to actually put this into practice?
Oh yeah, it's essential. I think it's important to be able to know that we are all going to be wrong at some point in our lives. It's what it means to be human. And the sooner we accept that, the sooner we can progress, really. And I think that people who dig in their heels rather than listen to a different viewpoint are the ones who are, they're hurting their own viewpoint. They're not growing. They're not developing. So I think it's so important that we are open and that we do question our perspectives. And obviously it can be difficult when we have a strong belief about something and we encounter the complete opposite, and we have to sit with that counterpoint. It can feel like almost an ego death, especially if the counterpoint is so strong that you are forced to change your position on something. It can be difficult, and it can be hard to admit that you're wrong. But I do think that the more you do that, the more you expose yourself to counterpoints and you actually sit with them and you listen to them, the better that is going to be, and the easier it becomes for you to change your opinion on things. And I think as new information comes in, we can adapt, and we should be adaptable. We are the most adaptable creatures on the planet, really. If you think about how we've evolved and what's happened over the thousands and thousands of years as we've developed societies. So I think that we are adaptable, and I think that it's important to remember that and not get too fixed or set in our ways. So we should always be open to new ideas. And this is what Socrates would definitely champion. And it might be hard, but that's the point.
It's a beautiful point in the way of adaptability. It seems like something we can forget, truly, how adaptable we are and how central that is to being human. I guess a term connected to adaptability is maybe resilience. And in a chapter on Buddhism, you talk about resilience. So what is it you think we can learn about resilience from Buddhism?
So Buddhism, I guess I have to sort of state up front, I'm not a Buddhist, but I really respect a lot of the ideas from Buddhist philosophy, more so than I don't follow the religion. There's a ritualistic side to Buddhism that is, obviously that's not what I do, but I'm really interested in the foundational philosophy and ideas. So I really love the contribution to thinking. And Buddhism has some wonderful ideas and some wonderful ways that we can become more resilient human beings. I really like the entire foundation of the philosophy, if we call it a philosophy, religion. There's a whole conversation around that, but for the sake of this book and for the sake of today's conversation, let's just go with the philosophy, the philosophical side of it. But the foundation is that we're all going to encounter suffering, and that's the nature of reality. But that can be transformed with our attitude towards that suffering. How do we manage that? If we know that we all have to suffer, it's what we do next. How do we manage this? And there are many suggestions within Buddhism. One of the ones that I think is so helpful is learning to control the mind, or at least to work towards that, because the mind is quite wild and it can be racing. It's very hard to control it. So there are many things that we can do, and Buddhism does champion meditation as a way to help understand the mind and to control the mind, or at least let the mind kind of relax, and this busyness can settle. It's like a snow globe. When you meditate, you can notice that everything starts to slow down a little bit, and the racing mind, you can start to become aware of it. And at first it's hard because you might not realize how much your mind is racing. But then when you become aware of that, that's when you can start to adapt and change. So there is an emphasis on working on the mind, because the mind is so powerful. And I really like that. That's one of the key things that I've got from Buddhism and from Zen Buddhism as well, is this commitment to meditation and how this can help with mind clarity of thinking and being aware of how you interact with the world. I think that's really
And how do you
profound.
see the concept of impermanence, which you talk about in this chapter, playing in? Where does impermanence come in?
Yeah, so I love this idea, and it's the concept is everything changes. Everything is in a state of flux, and nothing is ever the same. And we can see that just by looking around us. Everything does continue to change. And this is really powerful to remember. And there are two ways that we can remember this. So first of all, if we are suffering, we're experiencing something really difficult, we can remind ourselves that the suffering will change. It's always changing. So if you're stuck in a traffic jam, you know that it will change. The situation is always going to change. There is another side of that experience. And this can be particularly helpful when you're going through a tough time. It's like all storms pass, things will change. And of course, circumstances can change for the worse, but they will continue to change. We know that there's going to be change. So it's focusing on the fact that things will change. There is always going to be progress, and it's not going to be the same. So whatever you are going through, it will evolve, and it's focusing on that nature of things. Now, the counter to this is that when you are having an amazing experience with the family, or you're out, you're doing something, and you remind yourself that this is also an impermanent moment. You might be feeling incredible, but remind yourself that this won't last. And actually, that's lovely, because it highlights how beautiful that moment is, and it can help you to appreciate it even more, knowing that it's not always going to be like this. So you can really savor that experience with more clarity, I think. So it's a really useful concept. I use it all the time. I've found it's particularly good for exercise and physical challenges, always putting my mind in the future, knowing that this suffering or the pain in a workout or a difficult physical challenge, there will be another side to the experience. I'll get through it. I'll get past the difficulty. And I find that is really helpful.
Nice. And a similar idea to maybe stay in Eastern philosophy from Taoism that you talk about is Wu Wei. So what is that?
Yeah. So this is a lovely concept. This is one of the fundamental ideas in Taoism, this ancient Chinese philosophy. And Wu Wei is basically going with the flow of the universe, letting things unravel naturally. And the best comparison is to look at how water would deal with an obstacle, rather than just kind of getting blocked. Well, of course it will get blocked, but let's say a flowing river. It goes around the stone in the middle of the river. Water finds a way to work around the obstacle, and the birds will respond to the wind. They will work with the wind rather than try and fight against it. It's this going with the flow example that you can see in nature in many, many different places. And it's learning to let go and kind of go with the flow and see how that works out. It can be quite powerful, and there are many ways that the Taoists would implement this in their lives. And it's just learning to trust and sit back and, follow your intuition as well, which is a really lovely approach to life.
What helps you remember something like this, Ben? Like, for example, the concept of Wu Wei. may be new to many listeners, not something you hear all the time. Maybe the concept of going with the flow and living in accordance with nature or something like that might be something people have heard. But it's often really challenging if you're in the hustle and bustle of life, or, when our stress levels maybe rise from to-do lists on top of to-do lists. How do you remember things like this?
So I think with all of this philosophy, the best thing to do is to try and internalize it so that you can actually use it. And the best way to do that is to think of ways to practically bring it into your life. And that's why a lot of my writing is based on sharing an idea, a philosophical idea, and then giving a challenge where people can go and actively use that concept in their lives in a very practical way. And I think when you've used it and you can see how it works, and then you bring it into your life, I think that internalizes it. If you read something in a book, it doesn't have the same weight as when you actually use it. So I always try and bring these ideas to life. And that's where the challenge element of my work comes in, because I think it's so important to actually use this. So for instance, Wu Wei, one of the ways that you can use this in your life is one of the challenges I talk about is to go somewhere new and not look at your map and just be in that environment, kind of explore. Say you turn up to a new city. Well, explore. Just obviously, safety, try and, don't go and do anything dangerous, but trust your intuition. Maybe you don't have to follow the map on your phone all the time. You can let your intuition guide you. You can walk around, you can go with the flow. Maybe you see somewhere nice, like a little cafe that you want to go to. Maybe you go in there, you have an experience there, then you go somewhere else, and you stop being so analytical and having to have everything under control. You let things evolve naturally. Now, some people are actually really good at doing this, as is their natural characteristic, but not everyone is. So it's just kind of relinquishing control a little bit and just letting things unravel. And there's fun ways that you can play around with this idea. So that's one way of connecting to it.
Yeah. And it seems to me to connect back to happiness that you were talking about in the beginning. I'll be happy when. So it's, say we're on our way to work and we hit a huge traffic jam and now we're going to be late for, said meeting. It's the unpredictable nature of things, the things that don't go exactly as we would like them to, is when, our feathers get in a ruffle and our, all of the negative emotions may become about. But that definition of happiness, I'll be happy when, I think there's maybe a tendency to think that doesn't apply to me, or maybe I'm not exactly operating like that. But if we notice, we kind of are operating like that, at times. There are times where we don't behave like the water, we don't bend. So how do you think about that, just from like a desire standpoint of wanting? I mean, you talked about letting go, obviously, but this thing of wanting the world to basically kind of unfold in particular ways, or wanting my life to unfold in particular ways. How do I let go? How do I, accept that it just simply unfolds and I can adapt? Like, how can I come to believe that I'm actually way more adaptable than I realize?
I mean, that's really the core to everything, isn't it? Being able to adapt to whatever it is that we encounter. And I think that framing it as the power comes from within us and it's up to us to change, and not having such a heavy weight on everything outside of us. I think that's the beauty, really. When you focus on character building, focus on seeing every challenge and everything that happens in life as a lesson and a way to guide us, then it's about how we respond. And that is within our control. We can choose how we're going to deal with this situation. We can be proactive and respond. It might be difficult at first, might feel counterintuitive to respond by relaxing into it and going with the flow. It might not feel right to begin with, but the more you do these things, the more you learn to sit with a different point of view as well. you will be able to handle whatever is thrown at you. And it will continue to be difficult. It's not a one-time fix. You don't just do it and that's it. It's an ongoing practice, really. I think it's something that we all will have a different relationship at different points in our life with this whole concept. So it's an ongoing thing. But I think just being aware of it is the first step, really. And then we can try and focus on how we deal with life rather than worrying so much about all this external stuff. It's quite a empowering position to be when we focus on us inward rather than all this madness that we see in the modern world.
It's beautiful. And I think it's such an important point that it's going to be difficult. And there's an idea that you write about in the book that I hadn't heard of, which is writing a setback diary. So what's a setback diary, Ben?
Well, this is bringing attention to what you encounter day by day. So a setback diary is just being aware of the things that didn't go well throughout the day. And these might be very small things. You might have a great day, but you might not get the perfect parking spot and you might have got a little bit frustrated. So you would put that in the diary and you would give it a score of how you responded. So I got a bit worked up about that. Maybe a 4 out of 10 for how I responded. Obviously, I want 10 out of 10. I want to be perfect and just experience, there's no parking spot. I'm fine with it. I'm not even annoyed at all. Obviously, that's what you're working towards. But it's funny how there will be setbacks and little challenges all over the place. So maybe something like that. You bring awareness to the fact that, I was frustrated about not getting that parking spot. And then, of course, you can roll it out to other things. There's going to be challenges at home, at work, and with family members, with friends and strangers. And it's just being aware of how you responded. It puts the spotlight on yourself and how you handled all of those situations. So as soon as you start noticing how you are dealing with the world around you, that's the interesting thing, because you can start to change when you are aware that things need to be changed. When you see that you're getting irritated easily, then you know, okay, I need to do some work on X, Y, and Z. So the diary helps to highlight that. And it also helps to highlight the wins as well, the times where you responded really well to whatever you encountered. And you can look back at these experiences and see them as like a small trophy in a way. You start to collect these moments of, I handled that really well. And that builds confidence and self-trust as well.
And I think it's a reminder that maybe some of that search for wisdom, is not always external in some sort of book. It's within ourselves, that diary of putting the mirror in front of ourselves and doing a bit of exploring. Before we transition to the topic of wisdom more specifically, there's another philosophy that you write about in the book that doesn't always come up, which is Epicureanism. So what can we learn, from Epicurus?
So I love Epicurus. He's a great philosopher, and he was born in 341 BC, and he lived in Athens and created a school of philosophy in Athens called the Garden. Well, it was called Epicureanism, but he set up this garden where everyone would, well, not everyone, a selection of people would turn up, and they built a small community. And he believed that the purpose of life was to enjoy it. So he's very much focused on living a good life, but enjoying it. And what's so interesting is that this is often misinterpreted as he was this party guy, this hedonistic kind of person who just overindulged. And that's not the case. He actually discovered, and his philosophy led him to the realization that too much of a good thing is not a good thing, and less is more, really. So he actually lived a very simplistic life and learnt to appreciate the simple things in life. And I really like that. I think it's really helpful and very profound wisdom, knowing that we can appreciate the small things in life. So to give you a few examples, in the garden, they only drank water, and they had homegrown vegetables. Lentil soup was the the meal of the day. So it was very basic, but it was grown. They grew it themselves, and there was a real emphasis on community, good conversation, keeping things simple. And in a way, there was an emphasis on detaching from the modern drama So they weren't encouraged, members of the garden community weren't encouraged to keep up to date with politics and the public, like common, I don't know what you call it, everyday events. It was almost a head in the sand sort of attitude, a little bit of a detachment from what was going on, the chaos outside of the garden. And it was really just focusing on living well and appreciating the simple things. And I like that. I think that we can all kind of take lessons from this type of philosophy and these ideas.
Me too. Very underrated philosophy, and obviously not a ton of writing survives from him, but a lot of good stuff, and really enjoyed that chapter. So we generally spend the last bit of the conversation talking about wisdom specifically. So obviously you've been searching for wisdom, exploring all of these different philosophies, and it may be challenging to put it succinctly, but I'll ask you to make an attempt at answering the question, how do you define or think about wisdom in daily life, Ben?
So for me, wisdom is the application of ideas. So it's all well and good me reading about Epicurus or the Stoics or Buddhism, Taoism, but if I'm not using it in my life, then it's just an idea that's floated through my mind and hasn't left an impression. So for me, it's the application and the practical side of it, using these ideas, bringing them into my life. And I think the best way that we can do that is with practical challenges or actually having a formal practice or however you're going to do it. It's just connecting to these ideas. So that is wisdom for me, being able to use the knowledge that we have. It's all very well watching a video about someone exercising, but it's not the same as exercising. So it's trying to use ideas. For me, that when I think of wisdom, I think it's someone who is using the knowledge that they have learnt about. And obviously that's going to look different. That could be someone who's, studying the markets and using that to invest, but actually putting their money where they're, putting their money, get skin in the game, or however you want to sort of phrase that. But it's using the knowledge you have. And that to me is a perfect example of wisdom.
And if there's anybody listening that is, intrigued, maybe there's some excitement to put some of these ideas into practice, whether it be, specific exercises or ideas, are there 2 or 3 that comes to mind as like a good starting point, a good on-ramp into, applying some ancient wisdom in daily life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my go-to philosophical challenge concept, my favorite one is this idea called ascesis. And this is the idea of mental toughness training. So the Stoics did this, the Cynics did this, loads of ancient philosophers did this idea. And basically what you're doing is you're seeking out difficult situations. You're basically stepping outside of your comfort zone in a whole host of different ways. And this builds resilience. This makes you stronger mentally and physically as well. Now, the Stoics were wonderful as well. Some of the things they did were just fascinating. They would sleep on hard surfaces because it was uncomfortable. They would expose themselves to the cold and the heat. They would fast from food and water. They would go out barefoot because it was uncomfortable. They would wear hardly any clothes in the rain. And they would even deliberately embarrass themselves in public as a way to practice feeling shame and to then practice overcoming shame. So they were very holistic in how they approached their resilience. They did all these wonderful different things. And it can really be summed up with the idea of seeking out discomfort. And that toughens us up mentally and physically. So this idea of ascesis is very accessible to everyone. You can just adapt it to whatever your circumstances are and get outside your comfort zone. This is a wonderful way of practicing philosophy. So that's my first recommendation. And I love that. And that's really been a key thread in a lot of my writing. The second thing is meditation. I would encourage people to try this because you get an insight into how you think. And there's obviously a huge connection to Eastern philosophy, Buddhism, Taoism, and Zen. These all have formal meditation practices, but you don't need to be so formal with how you practice, but just have a go. Commit to a couple of weeks of meditating every day. Doesn't need to be a lot of time, but 10 minutes. Just sitting there, focusing on your breath and paying attention to how the mind can be quite busy. And maybe connecting to apps like Headspace or the Sam Harris Waking Up app. There's many different guided meditations. You need to find one that works for you and just bring that into your life as well, because it's a very philosophical exercise when you meditate. So that's another practice that I would encourage people to try as well. Those two combined, I think, are really, really good for getting into this and getting the ball rolling.
Well, beautiful. Well, this has been great. Again, your book is Seriously Happy. I loved it. Highly recommend it. I'll put a link in the show notes so it's easy to find. Is there anything we didn't cover that maybe we should have before we wrap up, Ben?
No, I think that's it. I guess the call to action is to go out and test these ideas out and try and bring them into your life and follow the threads that are intriguing, because that's the beauty of this. There's no fixed path. You don't have to do X, Y, and Z. You can just follow the ideas that are intriguing to you. And I think that's really quite fun to know that there's this whole world of exciting ideas and you never know where that insight or wisdom is going to come from. So keep your mind open and who knows what you'll get into.
Absolutely. Ben Aldridge, thank you so much for coming on In Search of Wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the In Search of Wisdom podcast. I hope you found something useful for daily life. If so, I encourage you to put what you heard into practice. If you're interested in more tools for the art of living, consider subscribing to Perennial Meditations on Substack. By becoming a member, you'll help support the project and gain access to our podcasts, meditations, and courses. Until next time, be wise and be well.